Welcome to Science. Today we are taking a deep dive into writing.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Get ready to think beyond your ABCs because today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of writing systems that leave alphabets in the dust.
It's true, alphabets get a lot of attention, but there are so many other incredible ways humans have found to make language visible, wouldn't you say?
It's like we grow up with alphabets, so we just kind of, take them for granted. But then you stumble upon these other writing systems and it's like, whoa, there's a whole universe of ways to capture words and ideas out there.
Absolutely. And each system has its own story to tell, its own history. It's really about the people who created it, their values, their environment. All of that is woven into the way they choose to represent language.
Right. It's like a cultural fingerprint almost.
Mm.
Okay, so let's start decoding some of those fingerprints, shall we? We've got a ton of fascinating sources here, everything from academic studies to historical accounts, all about writing systems that went in totally different directions than our familiar alphabets.
And you've picked a great place to start. Let's talk about the Arabic script. It's way more widespread than a lot of people realize.
I know, right? You usually think Middle East, but then you find out it's used across Africa and Southeast Asia too. It kind of blew my mind when I first started researching for this deep dive. So what's the story there? Why is the Arabic script so widespread?
Well, the spread of Islam played a huge role. As the religion spread, so did the Quran, right? Their sacred text, which is written in Arabic. And often, when a new religion takes root somewhere, its writing system comes along for the ride, so to speak.
So it's more than just practicality. It's about cultural influence, religious identity.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the power of language.
Exactly. And it's reflected in how the Arabic script adapted to these new regions. Because it wasn't just a matter of adopting the script wholesale. It actually had to be molded, kind of like, shaped to fit the sounds and structures of all these other languages.
Like fitting a square peg in a round hole almost.
In a way, yes. Our sources mention Swahili as a great example. It's a language spoken in parts of East Africa. And get this, it originally used the Arabic script too.
Swahili? Really? Wow, I had no idea.
It's true. It's pretty wild to picture what that must have looked like, Those elegant, flowing Arabic characters used for Swahili. Talk about a visual departure from the Latin alphabet they use for Swahili today.
It really makes you think about the people who lived through those transitions. Imagine waking up one day and bam, your language has a whole new look. What a mind bend.
It really speaks to human adaptability, that's for sure. But it wasn't always a smooth transition, of course. I mean, there were definitely some pushes and pulls along the way. Some communities embraced these new writing systems, while others really held on to their traditional forms.
Like a linguistic tug of war.
Yeah, exactly, a tug of war. And those tensions are still present today, believe it or not. Have you ever heard of Ajami?
Adajami.
It's an adaptation of the Arabic script used to write other languages, like Hausa in West Africa.
Oh, right, Ajami. I was reading about that. It's amazing how widely it's used. Newspapers, public signs, even literature. It really shows you the lasting impact of the Arabic script.
It really does. And it shows that adopting a new writing system isn't always a clean break. It's more like layers, like an evolution where different scripts can coexist, each one serving its own little purpose within a society.
It's not just a historical footnote either. I was reading that the 20th century saw this big push towards Latin alphabets in many regions, but, and there's always a but, isn't there?
Always.
It didn't always stick.
You're right. While it's true that Latinization was a big trend, the Arabic script has actually seen a resurgence in some areas, like, for example, Tajikistan. The Arabic script is very similar to the Persian script, so it kind of acts as this bridge to a lot of literature and cultural exchange.
It's like this constant dance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Global trends pushing one way, local identities pulling another.
Exactly, a dance. And nowhere is that dance more evident than in East Asian writing systems, where we encounter something totally different.
You're talking about Chinese characters, right?
Exactly.
Now, those are definitely in a league of their own. Those intricate characters are like little works of art.
They really are visually striking, and their complexity runs deep. See, unlike alphabets, where the symbols typically represent sounds, Chinese characters are logograms,
Logographs.
meaning that each character represents an entire unit of meaning, a whole concept, or even a whole word.
It's like each character is its own little puzzle box.
You could say that. And those puzzle boxes, they have quite a history. Our sources mention oracle bone inscriptions, the earliest form of Chinese characters we have dating all the way back to the Shang Dynasty.
Wait, oracle bones, as in bones used for fortune telling.
The very same.
That's amazing.
Isn't that incredible? Imagine these ancient scribes carefully carving characters onto bone fragments, trying to communicate with the divine. These inscriptions aren't just an early form of writing. They give us a glimpse into the beliefs and rituals of a civilization from thousands of years ago.
Talk about a direct line to the past. And to think those characters on those bones ultimately evolved into the complex system they have today.
They did, but of course it wasn't exactly a straight line. Over time, the characters went through this process of simplification and stylization.
Simplification. How do you
Sure.
simplify something that's already so complex?
Well, the original forms you see were very pictographic, meaning they actually resembled objects and ideas. Over time, they became more abstract, making them faster and easier to write.
Like a centuries-long game of telephone, but with pictures.
I like that, a game of telephone with pictures. But you know what? Even though they've become more abstract, those ancient origins are still there, kind of hidden within the strokes of each character. It's part of what makes them so visually compelling, I think. That sense of history layered within each form.
It's like each character has its own story to tell.
Exactly.
Our sources also mentioned something about simplified and traditional characters. Is that part of this evolution you were talking about?
It is. In the mid-20th century, mainland China adopted simplified characters to try to increase literacy rates. These simplified forms kept the essence of the original characters, but with fewer strokes, you see.
So like a shorthand version, but with centuries of history behind it.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this change wasn't adopted everywhere. Some places, like Taiwan, Hong Kong, they still primarily use traditional characters, preserving those older forms.
So you can have the same word written in two different ways depending on where you are.
Exactly.
That must get tricky.
It can be. But it shows how intertwined writing systems are with cultural identity and even political forces. Choosing which character set to use isn't just about practicality, it's a statement. It's about history, heritage, national identity.
Wow. So much more to it than meets the eye.
Always.
But I have to ask, how do you even type these things? There are thousands of unique characters, right? How do you fit them all on a keyboard?
That's a great question. And you're right, you can't just, map Chinese characters onto a standard keyboard like you can with an alphabet. There are just way too many characters. So, to get around that, some really clever folks developed special input methods.
Input methods. Like what?
Well, some let you input characters based on how they sound, or some even let you draw the characters on a touch screen.
Technology really came to the rescue there.
It did. And it wasn't just input either. Think about the massive project of encoding every single one of those characters, those thousands of characters, so that they could be displayed digitally. And not just that, but ensuring that they look the same across different devices and platforms. A monumental task.
From Oracle bones to digital dictionaries. Talk about a glow-up. Speaking of journeys through time, let's go even further back, shall we? Our sources mention some seriously old writing systems, ones that predate those Shang Dynasty Oracle bones we were just talking about.
We're talking about the OG writing systems,
Yeah.
cuneiform and hieroglyphs.
Okay, those I definitely remember from history class, but I wouldn't mind a refresher.
So cuneiform and hieroglyphs, two ancient civilizations, two very different parts of the world, both coming up with ways to capture language, and their impact is still felt today.
So cuneiform and hieroglyphs, they look totally different, right?
Oh yeah, visually they're completely distinct. Cuneiform, which was developed in ancient Mesopotamia, like way back around 3200 BCE, is all about those wedge-shaped marks, Those were pressed into clay tablets.
Clay tablets.
Yeah,
So cool.
right. You can practically feel the history. Now, hieroglyphs, which come from ancient Egypt around 3000 BCE, they're famous for being very pictorial. Unlike the abstract wedges of cuneiform, hieroglyphs often look like recognizable objects and figures.
So we got cuneiform abstract wedges on clay and hieroglyphs, beautifully crafted little pictures. But how did those systems actually work? Were they like alphabets with symbols representing sounds, or was it something else altogether?
That's where things get even more interesting. So cuneiform, it started out as a mainly pictographic system, but then it gradually evolved. They started incorporating phonetic elements like symbols that stood for syllables and even individual sounds.
It's amazing how those early writing systems evolved. It's like we were saying about Chinese characters. They often start with those picture-based forms and then gradually become more abstract.
It's true. Like, there's this common thread, this move toward, efficiency, trying to find a more precise way to capture spoken language. But cuneiform, it had its own set of complexities. Our sources mentioned these things called Diri compounds. Have you heard of those?
Diri compounds. No, what are those?
So these are basically sequences of cuneiform signs, but here's the thing. The meaning of the combined signs is totally different from what the individual signs mean on their own. It's like this linguistic puzzle.
Wow. Talk about a brain teaser. So you don't just need to know the individual symbols, you need to know how they interact with each other. That must have made deciphering these texts incredibly difficult.
It took some serious brain power to crack the code, that's for sure. And speaking of cracking codes, we can't talk hieroglyphs without mentioning the Rosetta Stone.
The Rosetta Stone. Everyone learns about that one.
Yeah.
It was like finding the missing link to understanding an entire civilization.
Exactly. The Rosetta Stone had the same text written in hieroglyphs, Demotic script, which is a later form of Egyptian writing, and ancient Greek. So scholars were able to use the Greek to decipher the hieroglyphs.
It's amazing how one artifact can unlock so much. But while the Rosetta Stone was key to deciphering hieroglyphs, how did scholars even begin to figure out cuneiform?
It was a long process. It took years and years of research and collaboration between many scholars. They compared inscriptions, looking for patterns, testing theories. It was painstaking work.
Linguistic detective work at its finest.
Yeah.
So we have cuneiform, hieroglyphs. What else is there?
Well, believe it or not, there are even older forms of visual communication. Things like pictographs and petroglyphs. They predate cuneiform and hieroglyphs.
Pictographs and petroglyphs. Those are the images you see on cave walls, right?
Exactly. They feel so primal, so immediate. Like, even if we don't know much about the cultures that created them, we can connect with them on this basic human level.
I know what you mean. It's like a basic human need to create, to express yourself.
Exactly. It's a universal language. Pictographs and petroglyphs, they both tap into that human instinct to communicate visually, to tell stories through images.
Our sources mention that pictographs, the ones made with natural pigments, are much rarer than petroglyphs. Makes sense, right? Those pigments would fade over time, whereas petroglyphs are carved into stone, so they last much longer.
Exactly. And because of that, petroglyphs offer a more durable record of these early forms of visual communication. They give us a glimpse into the daily lives of people who lived thousands of years ago. Things like their hunting practices, their rituals, how they viewed the natural world. It's all there.
It's like holding a piece of the past,
You know,
trying to understand those ancient stories. It's incredible.
it really is. It makes you wonder, what will future generations make of our own attempts at visual communication? I mean, will our emojis and memes stand the test of time like those ancient petroglyphs?
That's a great question. Maybe our digital footprint will be the petroglyphs of the future.
Maybe. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does. But for now, let's get back to those fascinating writing systems from the past. We've covered a lot of ground, from the incredible reach of the Arabic script to those beautiful Chinese characters.
And we've seen how each system reflects more than just a way of writing. They're a way of seeing the world. It's how we encode meaning and preserve knowledge.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? All these different cultures, separated by time and distance, all facing that same challenge. How do you take something as abstract as language and turn it into something real, something that will last?
It's a challenge that humans have tackled in so many creative ways. This diversity of writing systems that we see throughout history is a testament to just how creative and resourceful humans are. We're always striving to find new ways to express ourselves, to make sense of the world.
It's a never-ending journey of innovation and adaptation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, a never-ending journey. And as we continue to explore this amazing world of writing systems, who knows what other surprises we'll uncover? It really makes you think, doesn't it? About how we're not so different from those ancient civilizations, you know? We may not be carving on cave walls, but we've come up with our own ways of capturing our world. Look around, symbols are everywhere, emojis, logos. It's practically its own visual language, wouldn't you say?
You know, I've never thought about it like that, but you're right. Those little symbols carry a lot of weight in our digital world.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing how much they can convey.
I know, right? A single emoji can express a whole range of emotions, and those brand logos, they're not just designs. They represent entire ideas, values, lifestyles.
It makes you wonder if future archaeologists will be digging through the digital rubble, trying to decipher our emojis and memes like we try to understand ancient hieroglyphs. What do you think they'd make of it all?
Now, that's a fascinating question. It's like we're creating our own modern-day Rosetta Stone without even realizing it.
Right. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. But for now, let's jump back into those fascinating writing systems. We've already covered so much ground of the influence of the Arabic script, the beauty of those Chinese characters.
And we've seen how each system tells a story, not just about how people wrote, but how they saw the world, how they made sense of things.
It really drives home the point that Writing isn't just about putting pen to paper or, fingers to keyboard, I guess, in today's world. It's about capturing something much bigger, something universal.
Exactly. Across cultures and across millennia, humans have faced this incredible challenge, taking something as intangible as language and making it real, making it last. And we've seen some incredibly creative solutions to that challenge.
It's truly humbling.
It really is. It reminds you that we're all part of this long line of communicators, this lineage that stretches back to those very first marks made on cave walls. We're all connected by this basic human need to express ourselves, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that story of human expression, it's far from over. It really makes you appreciate just how creative humans can be. We've seen all these different cultures coming up with completely different ways of capturing language. It just
Right.
blows my mind.
It's not just about the mechanics of writing either, is it? Each system we've talked about, it's like it carries this whole cultural weight with it, a whole history.
That's what's been so fascinating to me. It's like we're getting a glimpse into different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really important to remember as we navigate our own world of communication today. It's easy to get caught up in the latest trends, the new platforms, all that. But ultimately, we're wrestling with those same questions as those ancient civilizations. How do we connect with each other? How do we share what we know? How do we build meaning together?
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this incredible world of writing, what would you say is the biggest takeaway? The thing you really hope our listeners will remember?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's that reminder that language is alive. It's constantly changing, evolving, adapting to the world around it. All those writing systems we talked about, they're not just dusty relics of the past. They're snapshots. Each one captures language in motion, a glimpse of a particular moment in time.
And who knows what those snapshots will look like in the future, right? What will our digital footprints say about us to those folks living centuries from now? Will they even be able to decode our emojis and memes?
That's a question for the archaeologists of the future, but it really highlights something kind of beautiful, don't you think? That human need to express ourselves, it's timeless. This drive to communicate, to connect, to leave our mark on the world.
It's a powerful thought. Well, I have to say, this has been an amazing journey. I've learned so much about writing systems I never even knew existed.
It's been a pleasure exploring them with you.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep those minds curious.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Welcome to Science. Welcome to is dedicated to exploring new technology to create informative and entertaining media. If you would like to create a podcast like this, be sure to visit Google Notebook LM. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more. Leave a comment if you have an idea for an episode that we should start researching.